All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the comprehensive yet pretty informal study of Kant's Kant's masterwork in modern philosophy, critique of pure reason. Woohoo! Matt and Pat, and we are both here as usual, but we've got three new guests. It's up to you if you want to introduce yourselves or remain anonymous. Up to you. But if you'd like to introduce yourselves, now is the time to do so.
My name is Harrison.
Yo,
Amanda.
Amanda's here.
My name is James.
James, all right. Harrison, Amanda, James, and Matt and Pat. Woo! All right, yeah. So now that is established, we've finished up on time. And was there a section after that we did, or is this the first thing that's after?
This is the first thing that's after that. Well, it's conclusions from these
But that's
concepts, but I would probably consider that
That's
still
part of the
section on time. No, actually,
That
I guess that is its own
involves
section.
space, right?
It involves space.
Okay.
Regardless, we're on elucidation.
Yeah, and we're on the elucidations of that, which is after the conclusions, which is we've been talking about space and time basically as the pure intuitions of experience. Which, if you don't know what that is, please refer to our previous videos, or as we kind of just did, if you join us in person, we go over it before the study if needed. So but if not, if you're just on the YouTube or whatever the video, please see our previous things for that. Cool. So now with that in the way, we're going to the elucidations, finishing up the time and space, and honestly, this is towards the end of the transcendental aesthetic as a whole as well. So I'm pretty hyped that we're getting to the end of that because the next sections are, I think, more interesting. But cool. We can either get reading, or if anyone has any more preliminary comments, we can say that now. If not, I think Patrick will take us away with the reading. All right.
Mm-hmm. Against this theory, which concedes empirical reality to time but disputes its absolute and transcendental reality, insightful men have so unanimously proposed one objection that I conclude that it must naturally occur to every reader who is not accustomed to these considerations. I'd like to stop there and point out that he's using transcendental in a way where he doesn't usually use the word transcendental, which is frowned upon in philosophy.
Yeah.
To use your same word in a different way without clarifying the distinction. He is using transcendental here not to mean concerned with the origins of experience,
Which how
but
he's
rather
been using it.
transcending experience,
Yeah.
which is basically the opposite of the way he's been using it.
Yeah.
So that was very frustrating, and I wasn't sure that was the case until I talked with Dr. Lee about it, and we all reviewed about it, and we were like, that's just annoying.
Yeah.
That's really just annoying.
I guess the only preface maybe you could say we get is the word absolute, but that's just such like a vague word that is not helpful. Like if you see transcendental, especially in a work like this where you have so many complicated and frankly original terms, you don't want to be already mixing them with absolute. Like you want them to stay how
What they are, so
Yeah.
that makes it more understandable. But anyway,
But
what
Kant
he's
thinks
saying
it's absolute is
basically,
enough to completely make you understand that he's using it.
yeah, what he's saying basically is that it doesn't transcend experience, right? Space and time do not transcend experience, but are empirically real. They are real for experience.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I will proceed.
Mm-hmm.
It goes thus. Alterations are real. This is proved by the change of our own representations, even if one would deny all outer experiences together with their alterations. Now, alterations are possible only in time, therefore time is something real. There is no difficulty in answering, I admit, the entire argument. Time is certainly something real, namely the real form of inner intuitions. It therefore has subjective reality in regard to inner experience, i.e., I really have the representation of time and of my determinations in it. It is therefore to be regarded really not as an object, but as a way of representing myself as object. But if I or another being could intuit myself without this condition of sensibility, then these very determinations, which we now represent to ourselves as alterations, would yield us a cognition in which the representation of time, and thus also of alteration, would not occur at all. Its empirical reality therefore remains as a condition of all our experiences. Only absolute reality cannot be granted to it according to what has been adduced above. It is nothing except the form of our inner intuition. I'm going to do the asterisk now.
Yeah.
I can, to be sure, say my representations succeed one another, but that only means that we are conscious of them in a temporal sequence, i.e. according to the form of inner sense. Time is not on that account something in itself, nor any determination objectively adhering to things. Returning. If one removes the special condition of our sensibility from it, then the concept of time also disappears, and it does not adhere to the objects themselves, rather merely to the subject that intuits them.
Let's break that down.
My thoughts? That's speculative metaphysics. He's totally talking about noumena and making like synthetic judgments about noumena. He says basically that if we could have access to things in itself, we would see that all of them happen simultaneously, basically, or they don't happen in any kind of sequence of change. There is no.
Yes.
That he basically says that noumena is eternal and unchanging, which is
a judgment.
A judgment about noumena. Yeah.
Which is, how is he making that judgment? How does he know?
He shouldn't.
Well, according to his own philosophy, he shouldn't. But what Patrick's saying is he's engaging in speculative
self-contradiction. Yeah, I'm saying that he contradicts himself in this section.
Yes.
What he should have said and there's no problem in getting around this even. He just shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Because it's easy to get around it and say, we know that change really exists in our phenomenal experience, and for noumena, we don't know whether it changes or not. But he actively doesn't say that. Instead, he says that noumena doesn't change. Yeah. Which doesn't make any sense.
He makes an apodictic claim.
There's no argument for it either.
Yeah, just in
oh boy.
Classic Kant moment.
Classic Kant moment.
Number, I don't even know the number we're at.
A number of like moments where we look at Kant and it's like, this makes no sense.
Yeah. I was talking to you a little about this last night. He has these moments where there are many such cases. As the kids say.
So he's a horrible writer.
He's a horrible writer, and honestly a questionable, systematic philosopher. Because he just adds things to the system that are just like this.
I initially hated Kant, came around to him being absolutely necessary, and still using his schema for a lot of things, and admitting the revolutionary nature of the Kantian revolution. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he really makes a lot of errors in his own philosophy.
On his way to getting to this revolutionary.
A lot.
Which is why I'm looking forward to getting past this section in general, because a lot of those more revolutionary things happen later on. That being said, is there anything else we want to cover from this? I think that covers the good bulk of it.
Yeah.
Was there anything on the end of?
Well, just to clarify what he's literally saying, he's literally saying that the objection change is real, therefore time is real. He says yes, change is real and time is real. They are phenomenally real. Mm-hmm. They are not real of things in themselves.
But then he says
he very much emphasizes that phenomenon are real, not illusory.
Yeah.
Yes, at least subjectively.
Yes.
Which in that part, he was, and then he goes on to say, but if I really could intuit myself without this condition of sensibility, noumena, maybe. Oh, okay. So cool. We covered that. Are there any more questions or considerations from that? That all made sense for everyone. All right, cool. Would you like to tackle the next, starting with the cause, however, around B55, see where that is?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, you can just read that paragraph probably, and if there are any weird things that come up, we'll probably just pause.
Stop.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, cool. So, go ahead.
The cause, however, on account of which this objection is so unanimously made, and indeed by those who nevertheless know of nothing convincing to object against the doctrine of the ideality of space, is this. They did not expect to be able to demonstrate the absolute reality of space apodictically, since they were confronted by idealism, according to which the reality of outer objects is not capable of any strict proof. On the contrary, the reality of the object of our inner sense, of myself and my state, is immediately clear through consciousness.
Actually, could you just pause
Yeah.
there? I do want to point out, because we were talking about how like Kant might differ from someone like Berkeley, and this is just a good like understanding, at least for like the history of philosophy and like the idea, the difference between the ideas. So he's kind of responding to Berkeley here in a way at least, because he's saying time and space are objectively real, but then idealism comes on the scene. He doesn't name drop Berkeley, but Berkeley's idealism comes on the scene and goes, okay, to exist is to be perceived. So time and space is kind of then limited by perception. But Kant is saying something completely different in the sense that for perception or for any experience at all, time and space come before as pure intuitions.
Yeah.
So he's just totally disagreeing with Berkeley here, and he's saying the problem is, what do you do with things that you can't see? That kind of gets mentioned,
Yeah.
right? I'm trying to find
Do time and space, do they exist nominally, or are they purely
They're-
things of the self of the
they're-
mind?
Phenomenon.
They're phenomena.
They're phenomena.
So they aren't numinal at all.
No,
Correct.
because we know of it.
Okay.
If we know of it, then it's phenomenon. Basically, is a good rule of thumb, except for that weird contradiction that we just covered. But yes, generally,
But do they also do they stretch into the, are there things that are like both, like for instance like this table exists here, there are aspects of this table, but this table also has parts of it that are numinal that I can't.
so that's what we call the table in itself.
The table I can't interact with the table in itself.
In
but I
itself, we can only interact with the phenomenal table, which is what we're experiencing.
Yes. So space and time have do not exist in and for themselves.
Well, according to Kant,
This is what we just
Yes.
covered previously.
According
He
to
says
Kant-
they do.
no, according to
Oh.
Kant, they don't.
No.
Space and time don't exist in the noumenal realm, and moreover, change doesn't exist in the noumenal realm.
Okay.
However, he shouldn't be able to assert that according to his
Yeah.
own logic.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah,
that's
which is-
what
okay, yeah, which is-
thing falls
yeah.
apart.
Yeah.
Rather, what he should say, and there would still be no difficulty in answering the argument. This just doesn't even support his system. It seems like it's just a stupid mistake. What he should say is time and space exist for us of the noumenal realm, and whether there is change in that or whether it occurs eternally all at once,
Just,
we don't know.
But
But he doesn't. He says it does occur eternally all at once.
So,
It
so
provides no
time and
argument for
space
that.
are real, but change.
What? Well, we can say that time and space are unreal because we can define time and space as conditions of experience, and therefore know
Because
that.
that's the sensibility. And he was
Right.
saying if we abstract, what was he saying? If we abstract from sensibility, then what happens? Then these very determinations we now represent ourselves. We deal with cognition, the representation of time, and this also alteration would occur at all. It's empirical reality. It's conditioned for all experiences. Only absolute reality cannot be granted.
So we can coherently say that time and space do not exist in themselves,
Yeah.
right? Because they are intuitions, right? They are representations in our own mind, and therefore they could not exist outside of our mind.
Yes.
However, there could be something analogous to them.
Yeah.
There could be something analogous to time which allows change to happen in noumenon,
Yeah.
right? But he just denies that there is
Yeah.
without a reason
Yeah, because that'd be like saying.
and in contradiction of his general
yeah.
principles.
Because it'd be like saying like why is the intuition of
alterations
space and
are
time
real.
get the separate
Yeah,
treatment from your
alterations
table?
possible.
Yeah.
Right. Because he specifically says,
Time is something real.
he specifically says, but if I or another being could intuit myself without this condition of sensibility, then these very determinations, which now represent ourselves to as alterations, would yield us a cognition in which these representations of time, and thus also of alteration, would not occur at all. That is
Is the contradiction.
the
Because first he says the real, and then
Yeah.
he says, oh no, but without my subjective sensibility, it wouldn't.
well, he doesn't contradict literally himself in that paragraph.
Oh,
what he
I thought-
contradicts isn't what he contradicts is his general theory.
No,
Of
he
which-
does. Okay, sure, but in the context of his general theory, if you
Yes.
take that, apply that to this, he does contradict.
Yes, no, that's what I'm saying. He,
Okay, yes.
he only contradicts his general theory, not what he's actually argued for yet.
Sure. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, what he contradicts is that we shouldn't be able to make synthetic judgments about noumenon.
And he just.
There is no alteration in the noumenal realm.
Mhm.
Seems to me to be a synthetic judgment.
Synthetic judgment. Yes.
about the noumenal realm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So with that being, but with Kant still. So now to take it to what I was pausing it for, in the connection to Berkeley and his problem, he says they did not expect to demonstrate its absolute reality of space apodictically, since they were confronted by idealism. So Berkeley's idealism came in the way of asserting the reality of time and space, because it's just kind of, he says, right, it's an idea. It's just a product of what for him is like perception. Right?
Not time, just space.
Space. Okay. Sorry.
Well, this is what Kant is saying, but this isn't even what Berkeley argues. It's a misrepresentation of Berkeley.
Sure, but that's kind of what he's saying.
It's a common misrepresentation of Berkeley based on Descartes. So, according to Descartes, right,
Mm-hmm.
there is thinking stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's thought, and extension, stuff which exists in space, right? And so, dualism, the idea realm is all thoughts, and then the physical realm is extension. But Berkeley does not use this same dichotomy when he rejects matter. He does not say that matter is not extended. What he says is that matter is that which is matter would be that which is unperceived. And
perceived by God, presumably, right?
well,
I don't know. I'm
No.
just asking, but
so matter. What Berkeley is saying is this: there are two things, minds and ideas.
yes.
A mind perceives, and ideas are perceived by minds.
Mm-hmm.
There is no other thing that provides a substance such that without a mind it would still exist,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Notice the idea of extension or the ideality of space doesn't come into this at all,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he talks about the
Well,
ideality
yeah,
of
I was gonna
space in that everything is an idea,
Yes.
but he doesn't particularly deny that extension exists. It exists in the same way everything else does.
But apart from a mind, although I guess Kant is still saying the same thing, because he says just before it's like through the faculty of sensibility.
Well, but then he says that they imagine space because they are familiar with this. They're used to imagining space as not real, but not used to imagining time as not real. But obviously, time only exists in minds too.
Yes.
So it doesn't really work.
So is Berkeley saying that everything that exists the way it exists because it's being perceived by the big all
By a mind.
by the
A
big
mind.
by a big all powerful mind that perceives everything
Yes.
else?
Yes.
Yes.
But there are also
Two-
other minds, right?
well, other minds.
Are
Yes,
But
but
those
everything.
minds
But,
exist as
but
perceptions
the one
of
that
the
makes
mind.
things exist when you look away is the
Is
all
God's
powerful
mind.
mind.
Is that there's a God's mind?
Yes.
But
Is that supposed? I don't know. I've always found
It's
it
called
does,
subjective idealism.
it does kind of bother me.
yes,
So they
it
do.
bothers most people. Are
It doesn't bother
Berkeley
me.
and idealists. Most people don't take that position.
Yeah.
I do. I do.
Big God mind.
Think about it. If God is
Okay,
everything, then everything Berkeley says is literally true.
Yes, but I guess what I'm getting caught up in is like the application of term perception. Just because, like, I tend to see that as something like empirical. But I guess if you
All
like
he's saying
perceive-
is nothing exists.
Oh, because
outside
you
of
perceive
perception.
ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay, yes. All right, then I do agree. But not in the way it's usually presented, I guess. Anyway, so that whole, I just feel like that was important to touch on. He's
Did we
like trying
finish
to.
this.
Huh? No, we got up to the word consciousness around the middle of the paragraph.
Immediately clear through consciousness.
Yes.
The former could have been a mere illusion.
Yes. Do you want to
Yes.
continue about that? Sorry. Yes. Thank you.
So the former, which is the outer objects, could have been a mere illusion, but the latter, which is the inner self, according to our opinion, is undeniably something real. But they did not consider that both, without their reality as representations being disputed, nevertheless belong only to appearance, which always has two sides. One where the object is considered in itself, without regard to the way in which it is to be intuited, the constitution of which, however, must for that very reason always remain problematic. The other, where the form of the intuition of this object is considered, which must not be sought in the object in itself, but in the subject to which it appears, but which nevertheless really and necessarily pertains to the representation of this object.
This is that classic Kantian redundancy.
Yeah.
He's just saying once again that it's real, but it really exists for you. It really exists as an appearance,
Yeah.
which he already said. So it's just
Which
it's
also, actually going back doesn't really misconstrued, or which doesn't really disagree fundamentally with what Berkeley's saying, but I guess he's trying to make it like it does, because he uses the phrase like confronted by idealism, which is why.
Well, again, Kant misrepresents basically everyone except Leibniz.
Of all the people, why?
Because he was educated in a Leibnizian Wolf tradition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's the one he's most familiar with. But everyone else, I guess he doesn't misrepresent Locke either, because Locke's pretty easy to get.
Yeah. Not much like misrepresenting to be done. Else is like.
But yeah, he misrepresents Hume. He misrepresents Berkeley. He misrepresents Spinoza incredibly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't suppose he misrepresents Aristotle, but he does misrepresent thinkers as a rule.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Would anyone like to continue? If no one else wants, I can read the next paragraph. No one else
Welcome to Immanuel Kant Trash Talking Club.
Yeah. The studies generally us like. But hey, it's a critique of the reasons. Sure.
All right, Matt. Or
do you want to read? Sure. Yeah, Harrison can read. Sure. Go ahead.
From where?
From so at the bottom, the last paragraph of 166. It's the line above 839.
That goes for a while though. We might want to pick up a point to stop.
Yeah, we'll let you know when we want to
Okay.
say something. So you can just start and we'll let you know. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Time and space are accordingly two sources of cognition, from which different synthetic cognitions can be drawn a priori, of which essentially pure mathematics in regard to the cognitions of space and its relations provides a splendid example. Both taken together are namely the pure forms of all sensible intuitions and thereby make possible synthetic a priori propositions. But these a priori sources of cognition determine their own boundaries by that very fact that they are merely conditions of sensibility, namely that they apply to objects only so far as they are considered as appearances, but do not present things in themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe
so
pause
I'd
there.
like to stop
Yes.
just because we want to clarify something we've already went over, but you weren't here for, which is Kant saying that space and time are the forms of all experience.
Yes. So what I was saying before this, the way I started recording, I was talking about preconditions of experience. It's generally a good way to think about what he's doing with all this synthetic a priori and the different kinds of judgments. The whole point, the utility of these for Kant in this project is to provide an explanation for why experience happens.
Yeah.
As appearance, because we have this noumena phenomenon distinction. It would be really helpful if yes, he does he doesn't call it noumena yet, but he does draw that distinction where he says as appearance but not present things themselves. So that's really a core Kantian concept, which hopefully I think by now you're beginning to understand that kind of dualism in a way.
Basically, if I want to perceive anything outside of myself, it has to be organized in space.
Yeah.
Right? It has to have a location. If it has properties, those properties have to occupy said location.
Yeah.
And if I want to have any experience, whatever, whether internal or external, they have to be organized in time because experience implies change.
Yeah.
So in that
Which
way,
we had a good
space and
talk
time
about,
are the
actually.
pure forms of all experience. Okay.
Cool. Do you want to continue? Those alone are the field of their validity. You see what that is?
Oh yeah. Those alone are the field in their validity, beyond which no further objective use of the term takes place. This reality of space and time further leaves the certainty of experiential cognition untouched, for we are just as certain of that whether these forms necessarily adhere to the things in themselves or only to our intuition of these things. Those, however, who assert the absolute reality of space and time, whether they assume it to be subsisting or only inhering, must themselves come into conflict with the principles of experience. For if they decide in favor of the first, which is generally the position of the mathematical investigators of nature, then they must assume two eternal and infinite self-subsisting non-entities, space and time, which exist, yet without there being anything real, only in order to comprehend everything real within themselves. If they adopt the second position, as do some metaphysicians of nature, and hold space and time to be relations of appearance, next to or successive to one another, that are abstracted from experience, though confusedly represented it in this abstraction, then they must dispute the validity or at least the apodictic certainty of a priori mathematical doctrines in regard to real things, e.g. in space. Since this certainty does not occur a posteriori, and on this view, the a priori concepts of space and time are only creatures of the imagination, the origin of which must really be sought in experience, out of whose abstracted relations imagination has made something that, to be sure, contains what is general in them, but that cannot occur without the restrictions that nature has attached to them.
Yeah, maybe there's a good place.
So I think this, for once, we have strong arguments from Kant. Let's
Oh,
go.
You want to elaborate? I know that you made that great.
Yeah. So.
What has now come to be a surprising.
Yeah. Oh my God! Kant doing good philosophy well. What? Right.
And boom.
So he says. Right, what are the alternative positions to Kant's thesis that space and time are preconditions of experience? The alternatives are, that have been expressed during his time, are that there is such a thing as absolute space and time, which is the thesis of Newton, basically, that there is just such a thing as location.
Which the mathematical investigators of nature, those are
That's
mathematical
Newton.
physicists.
That's
of the
Newton.
time, yeah.
He's talking about
Actually,
Newton.
I don't even know if there was anyone else really.
I mean,
at least of historical
followers of Newton, I guess,
Yeah,
but he's
Newtonians.
above all talking about Newton.
Newton, yeah.
And then the second position that they are relations related to each other is the position of Leibniz, yes, and others. I mean, but those are the sort of the epitomes of the two positions here. And he says both of them have serious problems.
Yes.
For the position that there is absolute and space and time, we assume that they infinitely subsist, but that they don't exist and contain real things within them, right? Because we aren't positing anything by positing absolute space.
Yeah. Which is a trippy concept, but like if you take. Sorry, do you want to?
Have an idea of absolute space, but don't put anything in it.
Which is what we were talking about.
Well, yeah,
before.
space relies on things being within.
Exactly.
It exists and depends on what's.
Exactly. So he's saying that it doesn't exist, and yet it comprehends everything in it.
Which is weird because earlier in this book he like actually does try to make that claim that you can do that.
Well, yeah, I guess it's like
Yeah, it's very strange, but
he's criticizing that.
Isn't space just the absence of things? The absence of things being
no, because things could be in space
it's
too.
a thing in itself,
right?
It's not just an
because
absence.
look, if I have one point on this brisk and another point on these brisks, there's things in both of them, but there's space between them too. So space isn't just the absence of things, because things are present and yet space is present too.
Well, there's the distance between them, but that distance only exists because there isn't anything in that space. There's a separation between those two things.
But there is no separation between those two things, right? I'm talking about two different points in the same.
Okay, I guess that's true because I guess things take up space.
Yes, exactly.
It's not purely relational. Which
It's
is
not point.
Which is the other view.
Right, exactly.
that
So it's not point and then space and then point.
Because points are space as well.
Because it's not just because things don't occupy points of space, rather they occupy areas of space.
Areas of space.
You can't have a point without having an area of space. Is essentially the.
So space isn't just the non-existence. Anyway, I don't think this is the stronger part of the argument because it just points to the general weirdness of the theory.
Yeah.
The stronger part of the argument is here against the relationality of space.
Yes.
This is pretty strong. He says that basically if you adopt that they are relational, right, then they become a posteriori. Because you have to already know the things that are related before you know the relation.
Yeah.
Which means that space is a posteriori. But if space is a posteriori, how do you do geometry?
Yeah.
That's a knockdown.
That's a pretty knockdown argument. Yes.
Leibnizian seething. Rightfully so. Thank you, Kant. Good argument. Cool. So,
Congratulations.
So space is a posteriori.
Should you wearing a wig?
Wait, why can't you do geometry of spaces a posteriori?
Because geometry is an a priori science. You don't need to appeal to experience to understand geometry.
Yeah, right. Because you can.
And we know that it's a priori because it's necessary.
Yeah, remember Descartes' great insight that
dictates.
connects geometry and quantity.
Yeah.
And that's all becomes, or even before that, even Euclidean geometry is
Right.
Yeah.
It's necessarily the case that every triangle on the Euclidean plane has 180 degree.
and
angles.
to come up with those definitions, you don't need to appeal to experience.
But according to the position which says that space is a relation between objects, well, the relationality has to come after the objects, but the objects are given an experience.
Yeah.
So it should follow that the relationality of space is
Based on the experience of the objects.
which means that it's empirical. But that means that geometry is empirical, which would mean that it's not universal and necessary, which
Yeah.
isn't true.
As
So
Kant showed
the
earlier.
position isn't true.
Yeah.
So congratulations,
It's
Kant.
argument.
It's good philosophy. That is good philosophy.
Please, more of that. All right. With that being said, that's the end of the paragraph, right? No. We
it's
stopped.
not.
We stopped.
It's a long-ass paragraph.
Yeah. So Harrison, this is the end of the paragraph. It's after the 25th little like
Yeah,
the
I
final
got it.
marker 25.
Yeah.
You see, the first succeed in opening. Yeah.
The
Go ahead.
first succeed in opening the field of appearances for mathematical assertions. However, they themselves become very confused through precisely these conditions if the understanding would go beyond this field. The second succeed, to be sure, with respect to the latter, in that the representations of space and time do not stand in their way if they would judge of objects not as appearances but merely in relation to the understanding. But they can neither offer any ground for the possibility of a priori mathematical cognition, since they lack a true and objectively valid a priori intuition, nor can they bring the positions of experience into necessary accord with those assertions. On our theory of the true constitution of these original forms of sensibility, both difficulties are remedied. Do we continue after that?
No, that's the end of the paragraph. But I just need to. I had like a Kantian jargon brain rot moment, so I need to reread that in my head. The first succeed in opening. Oh, by first does he mean the first position?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
The Newtonian position.
Okay, so
The second meaning the Leibnizian position.
So I guess we can just go sequentially if we don't want to pick anything out. So the Newtonian position succeeds in opening the field of appearances for mathematical assertions. We can study the world in a mathematical, quantifiable way. However, they themselves become very confused if the understanding would go beyond this field. So he's basically kind of saying this is a little too reductive. The understanding, there are more things than just things to be measured in the world of experience. Okay, and then so that's basically summing up the pros and cons of the Newtonian position. Second position, Leibnizian position, to be sure, with the respect to the latter, in that representation of space and time do not stand in their way. Oh, okay. So he's basically criticizing what we just said.
Yes.
So
recap.
Yeah. So we just said that. So he's just being a little redundant, but not necessarily of himself, more redundant of our explanation of what we just said. So that's fine. On our theory of the true constitution. Okay, and then he says our theory fixes the problems of both. Surprise, surprise, my theory's right. Cool. All right. Cool. All right, so that's the end of that paragraph. Okay. Do anyone else want to read? If not, we can just go through the order.
Well, you're last.
You don't want to read?
No.
Okay.
No,
You do.
Oh no, I was going to read. Then you read. Okay, cool.
Alright.
So I will.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. I will be the last in the cycle when we start. Okay. Finally, that the transcendental aesthetic cannot contain more than these two elements, namely space and time, is clear from the fact that all of the concepts belonging to sensibility, even that of motion, which unites both elements, presuppose something empirical. For this presupposes the perception of something movable, In space considered in itself, there is nothing movable. Hence, the movable must be something that is found in space only through experience, thus an empirical datum. In the same way, the transcendental aesthetic cannot count the conception of alteration among its a priori data, for the time itself does not alter, but only something that is within time. I just want to pause here real quick. I'm wondering if you had any issues with what he says about motion and alteration being, motion being. Wait, I might just be confusing that with alteration. If not, then I think it's literally fine. But my thing, I was going to bring up maybe, because you were kind of arguing either the last session, the one before that, about how, because I was wondering how alteration is necessary for experience. And you gave the argument that was pretty convincing. But he's kind of saying that motion is something empirical, something a posteriori.
Alteration
yeah,
is necessary for experience? Yes, it is necessary for experience. You couldn't have an experience without alteration.
Yes,
However, at the same time, you can't have alteration without experience, because once you have state A and state B, you already have an experience.
Okay, because here he's saying alteration cannot be considered a priori. So I'm just making sure that, so that's the thing I was wondering if you would have an issue with. But maybe if you just say you don't have an experience, maybe that's fine.
Alteration cannot be considered a priori. Where does he say that?
Towards the end of the paragraph, in the same way the transcendental aesthetic cannot count the concept of alteration on one's a priori data. For time itself does not alter, but only something that is within time. It's the second to last sentence.
Well, that's odd, because he admits that alteration, like certain truths about alteration, are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So that's true. So, but the idea that we don't have an intuition of alteration, that's for sure. So the transcendental aesthetic.
Oh, yes, okay.
Could be
The
considered.
transcendental aesthetic cannot count. Okay. I think that
Because you wouldn't have an intuition of alteration, because alteration cannot be given before experience.
What is alteration?
Changing from one state to another.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So hopefully, for after the aesthetic, he will tackle that or something. Okay. Cool. All right. I will continue then if there are no other qualms or questions or comments. For this, there is required the perception of some existence and the succession of its determinations, thus experience. And that wraps it up with that last sentence. That was weird. I probably should have just finished the paragraph. Okay. Well, let me just see if there's any last sentence that we want to talk about. Please. Required. Oh, okay. Yes, so he's basically saying that for alteration, there is required the perception of some existence and the succession of its determinations, thus experience. Okay. Cool. Yes, so the aesthetic cannot count for that a priori. Maybe something of the understanding could, because he kind of just was attacking the Newtonian position for saying there was more than just stuff we can see and measure. So, cool. Maybe he will go on that further. Cool. Is there anything else in this whole thing? There are summaries or any big takeaways that we want to discuss before we end this in this session of this section?
Why do people like Kant consistently contradict themselves, and then you just give and take what you want to believe?
Kant's particularly bad.
This isn't usually in philosophy. Philosophers are a lot more careful and systematic. But Patrick actually gave some, he said something earlier that might shed some light on this. He was educated in a specific philosophical tradition, the
Good afternoon to library patrons. Thank you so much for stopping by the library on this Friday. Right now the time is 4:30. I'll give you a heads up, we are going to our Friday evening study hours in 1.5 hours from now at 5. Library will close at 8. Should you choose to stay with us, and we hope you do, please be sure you have your Drew ID with you. You'll need that to get back in the building should you leave between 4:50 and 8 p.m. as the doors will be locked at 4:50. Once again, study hours begin in 30 minutes at 5 p.m. and the library closes tonight at 8.
All right. So Kant was educated in the Leibnizian Wolff tradition, which that itself is a weird tradition in my opinion anyway. the much more like clear, no contradictions really found within that comes more from like Spinoza. Leibniz had a very like interesting, Leibniz specifically an interesting position of like pluralism, and a lot of the stuff that try to combat Spinoza's position with just doesn't logically follow, which Spinoza and Spinozists kind of show. But Kant being educated not from the Spinoza's and kind of misunderstanding Spinoza's position doesn't really. So I think it's a consequence. Maybe I don't know for sure, but my theory is that it's a consequence of how he was educated and the stuff he was like reading, and he kind of took that and made that the base for his way of doing philosophy.
I think he overinflated himself and therefore got lost in his own system.
It's true too.
That's why I think he contradicts himself so much.
That's another good point. Honestly, yeah, that makes sense. Although I do want to give some like leeway, because it's easy for us to just like in retrospect be like, haha. But he was, you know, if you consider like the scope of the project, he was doing so much, and like, you know, I can't really blame him that tired for getting lost in his own sauce sometimes.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Like, it's a lot to learn, a lot to keep track of, and he was. If what Dr. Lee told me was true, this isn't some like little just fun story like Newton with the apple falling on his head thing, but I don't know if this is actually true or just that. But Dr. Lee told me that Kant like locked him, like basically socially isolated himself for like 8 years straight to write this book. So okay, so yeah, also, you know, what 8 years in isolation does to a philosopher. You know, he probably wasn't getting this very checked by, you know, contemporaries. Is you know, academia I'm sure functioned very differently. 1770s Germany versus, you know, what we experience now. So yeah, I think it's just a lot of very kind of.
One interesting thing to note is Kant is one of the few philosophers that are studied by professors that was also himself a philosophy professor.
Yes.
So, I mean, I've noticed a trend because when you have those philosophy professors, it's normally these German idealists, and they say gobbledygook. They say absolute, like, I mean, maybe there's some meaning in it a lot of the time, but
there is a lot. There's good stuff.
But clear writers are usually found outside of academia. In philosophy.
At this time, at least, and in this tradition.
Yeah. Probably that does start to differ with analytic philosophy.
That was one of the big points of analytic philosophy. They wanted to get, like, their whole project is built on clear, precise language, not just for ease of understanding, but sort of that's important for reality and like the study of it in itself, like to be clear with definitions.
I mean, Kant wants to be clear and precise with definitions. The problem is he also wants to be proper with definitions and proper with order. And in trying to do that, he winds up inflating himself like crazy in order to do that. In order to like go in an order which is supposedly has like a logical structure to it, and to I mean, this is very much my opinion. I'm getting up on a soapbox and saying that he should have just gone in whatever order ideas occurred to him or whatever order seemed most natural, rather than like, this should be called this because of the long history of scholastic whatever the fuck.
Yeah. We kind of criticized, for example, a few sessions ago, we were criticizing his separation of, what was it, like exposition of space, transcendental versus like metaphysical exposition, and that's stupid thing to make because of the way he was talking about it. It was almost, he even admits there's like a point where he's like, this could have been put in the other category, but I just put it in this one for whatever reason. So like, he himself gets lost in his own properness. So that's it's also a consequence of like just academic writing.
Being pedantic, basically.
I don't know how much of that was his choice versus like the standards of the time, but this is really probably the only thing I've heard of this variety from his time.
So why do we study Kant?
Why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this?
Why
are we doing this to ourselves?
Yeah.
No, I wanted to dramatic pause just to be like I didn't have an answer, but I do have an answer.
There is an answer, I promise.
So why are we doing this to ourselves? It's because of this restructuring of. I mean, first of all,
there are many reasons.
First of all, I tend to actually believe what he said generally about time and space. For instance, that like time and space are preconditions of experience, first, and so we don't know what they are in themselves. I mean, I think that makes sense, and that's the argument we had just then, right there. And it doesn't exist prior to Kant, right? Second of all, I don't think we can ignore that. I don't think we can ignore the fact that we have a filter which consistently creates something called phenomenon, right? I mean, that does sort of pre-exist in Locke because we have primary and secondary qualities.
But this is like a whole next, like.
Well, yeah, but he doesn't say that there's primary and secondary qualities. Instead, there are basically two realities,
Yeah.
so to speak. There's a phenomenal reality and a noumenal reality. There's things for us, and we have to consider working our way out from things for us. There's important criticisms of the pre-existing scholastic arguments for the existence of God. What else? Yeah?
I just have a question for Locke's reality. What's the difference between things being in it for themselves in the noumenal realm and the things like the secondary qualities of it?
Well, so what's the difference between it?
Of there being like a separate, like entirely separate reality, and then Locke's thing where there's just like primary qualities and the secondary qualities which we don't perceive.
So for Locke, secondary qualities basically are not their own consistent round with a set of rules or like pre-existing experiences. Rather, how should I put this? I mean, if I were to draw it, I would simply erase this circle. He doesn't say that there is like
It's still connected to our metaphysical reality. It's more of an epistemological problem. I think, for Locke.
How is noumena not connected to our metaphysical reality?
so basically,
Because we don't.
for Kant we had this whole sphere of phenomenon which has certain rules, metaphysical rules, which are based on these preconditions for experience.
Like space and time.
Right,
cause and
exactly.
effect.
Exactly.
You go
Which
along.
don't function according to Locke. Instead, what we get is this is the primary quality and this is the secondary quality.
And we experience the secondary quality.
Right, and we experience the secondary quality, and our statements are just about reality as such. And so our statements are inadequate, and usually he's very skeptical compared to Kant because we only have one reality, basically, and we have inadequate access to it.
So it's an epistemological problem, but it's a metaphysical, like it's the same.
I mean, beyond that, the bigger, more obvious difference is that Locke is an advocate of tabula rasa,
Which is
the belief that humanity is a blank slate and we don't have any inherent ideas and it gets impressed on us. So he wouldn't accept any, he doesn't, that's what we mean when we say he doesn't have a lens.
yeah.
Basically, he doesn't believe that there are, I mean, he admits that like there are the senses, but he doesn't believe in like preconditions like space and time that enable us to make judgments about cause and effect a priori.
I see.
Instead-
Concepts, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Instead, all of that comes from our observation of secondary qualities. And we don't really know how it works. It's kind of an incomplete system in a lot of ways.
Especially when it comes to like mathematics, that you got.
Because he's
It
like
doesn't account for mathematics very well.
also like what in Locke's system prevents us from just observing the primary qualities?
Kind of just how it's set up. I think kind of just.
Just kind of
Well,
There's
that's-
arguments for it.
No, that's basically well, by definition.
by definition of primary qualities is what that which we cannot observe.
Yes. Well, it's things as they exist. Yeah. So I mean, that's where it is like Kant, right?
Yeah.
Well, it is our senses, but it's not our sensibility, if that makes sense. So like we have the five
And
senses.
sensibility would be those innate ideas like space and time.
Sensibility is the general faculty.
That's what and we.
It includes space and time, but it's the general faculty.
They're what allow us to receive space and time.
Sensibility.
Yes.
Yes.
From noumenal whatever.
But I thought space and time didn't exist nominally.
Correct. The conditions of our sensibility are not conditions of noumenon.
So what we perceive as space and time around noumenal, but there's something given to us that our sensibility interprets as space and time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes. Sorry, it gets again weird. It's hard to.
Not space and time as we see it, but it's
Yes.
that
There's something in space and time. There's something in itself, which is
Which can be
nominally given
that can be
to us.
extrapolated.
And then sensibility is the filter of that, and then space and time is the filter of empirical evidence.
But for instance, for Locke, how exactly do you solve the problem of space and time, or space or time? Is there absolute space? Is space relation?
Well, that's what we just put.
I'm saying I don't think Locke even has an answer, and I don't think he could
I've
have an answer.
not read too much of Locke's letters.
I don't know that Locke has or could have an answer about what space literally is or what time literally is. And also, once you like accept a Lockean system, which Hume does, accept that like you don't have these innate ideas, cause and effect falls apart.
Yeah.
So he's defending like a system which is in some respects broadly Lockean from it falling apart due to Hume.
Yeah.
So yeah.
This is also in the history of philosophy. It's like a response to Hume largely. So,
Yes.
yes. So hopefully that answers.
So it kind of responds to Hume by fixing Locke a little bit.
Just by like revamping the whole system.
I mean,
Which is
I
to
would
go
say-
back to the original question, why it's so important. It's a revamping of how we could.
I kind of
Figure
agree
it
that
out.
he's fixing Locke, honestly, because primary and secondary qualities.
Sure.
I mean, it is a sort of
if
similar.
you're taking like Numina to phenomena to be like analogous to those, sure, I guess it's. Like,
Yeah, I mean, he's
Well,
even.
how would they-
I
how
mean,
would
literally,
how would they
literally, Locke calls
Well, again, because
primary
there's that
qualities.
physical difference.
I know not what.
What is
Locke calls primary qualities literally. I know not what.
Yeah, so I'm not denying there's similarities, but I don't.
when you say the metaphysical difference? What is the metaphysical difference?
So for Kant, there's a metaphysical difference between noumena and phenomena because it's like kind of like Patrick was saying, it's a whole separate reality
And
that we
there's
still
no-
have access to. Locke is saying primary qualities like directly affect our like they don't get really filtered, right? It's just it's an us problem. We don't have the capacities to see primary qualities, but they're there they're metaphysically there in our world and directly affect our objects. Noumenon doesn't. There are metaphysical filters that prevent us from getting to.
But Numina does still interact with us, kind of.
Yes, but through filters. Locke, as far as I know, there are no really filters here, which is why he took away.
There's a filter of our literal sentences, but there is not a filter of like.
Metaphysics.
Yes, there's not like pure intuitions of space and time. There's not, and therefore.
So-
Yeah, sure. Thanks
Yeah.
for
So
coming.
what makes the whole what other filter? So does Kant also believe in being a filter of the senses as well?
Yes.
They're kind of one and the same though. The
Yes.
metaphysical and epistemological filters are the same because the reason we can't know is because there's a metaphysical filter.
So yes, Kant
And-
believes in the filter of the senses, but more importantly, he believes in the filter of space and time. And our concepts only apply on the
From
basis of space and time, right? And because of
So
that
you're saying
combination, there are certain metaphysical statements we can make a priori that we can't in Locke. So Kant is much more able to account for mathematics and also for cause and effect.
So it's kind of like adding stuff on top of Locke.
No, well, this is why. So you could interpret
In my
it like that.
position, you could interpret it like
I
I kinda see
don't
it
like
though.
thinking of it that way because I think those differences are just too fundamental. I consider it a whole different system. But I'm also like, this isn't like a fixed thing. Like, if you want to look at it that way, you can.
Yeah.
Like, that's a fine, I guess. My preference is to look at it. And not only just
I
from
mean,
like my
Spinoza definitely didn't think of himself. No, not Spinoza. Kant didn't think of himself as a Lockean.
Exactly, that too. For like historical reasons. Like, this is also like he calls it himself like I think after he published it, but he called it a Copernican term of philosophy. Like, these are brand new ideas that like really haven't thought of before, which answer, to go back to your question, why do we still do it? It's this whole new, like, I don't want to say like perception, because like,
And
this language is weird, but like it's just a whole new way of thinking about things, like Pat, and that was the value. It's like once Kant says this stuff, like you kind of have to answer if you want any meaningful, if you want reality in itself, which philosophy is really interested in reality in itself.
Yeah.
Here we go. He gives a whole book on saying why we can't do that.
I do just want more just kind of to clarify when we're saying metaphysical, what we're saying. What is metaphysical?
Metaphysical having to do with like reality, not just our knowledge.
Our knowledge.
Realities
For Kant or in philosophy in general? Because
Yeah,
Kant has a
philosophy
very
in
particular.
general.
Yeah, he answered for philosophy in general. Kant is more particular.
Hmm.
Kant has like a proper definition of what is like properly metaphysical.
Which honestly, I would just hold off on that because he talked about it in the introduction, because this is still recording. So if you want to ask some more fundamental questions that have been answered already by
Yeah.
previous things, because this is all new stuff, so if you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
keep recording. But this seems to be a little redundant for the sake of YouTube, so I'll edit here. Thank you everybody for watching. Long video, but definitely lots of. Oh, actually, it wasn't even an hour, so I think we've had longer ones. So this was cool. Lots of cool new participation and good questions, and hopefully a clear picture of history, philosophy, history, ideas that make it easier to understand and connect. In your own understanding and study of this, and definitely good insights for here, especially when he brings up people like Leibniz and Newton, and he'll bring up Spinoza later and other things. So all good stuff to know. And we're finishing up the Transcendental Aesthetics. So after this, what you said is general remarks,
General remarks.
and then is that the end?
End of the aesthetic.
Woo! All right, one more section. So that'll be next time. I'm looking forward to the end of the aesthetic, honestly. And if nobody else has any concluding statements, we will end this recording. Woo! All right. Thank you, guys.